Hello everyone and welcome back to the part 2 of the webinar series focusing on inside sales. We are again thrilled to have Phil Keane from Renaissance Electronic Services, RES, who shared his insights in the first part about the role of inside sales, and now he's going to share a little bit more on the concept of how inside sales works together with account executives and how organizations should make the right call about when they should use inside sales and when should they be focusing on external sales as well. Thank you again, Phil.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, let's say, for example, you have an SDR, and at what point in time, in terms of the career path, when do you sort of have a feeling that, okay, this person, he or she, is now ready to take on, assuming it's a linear path, that is, they do that, then they go to an account executive role. So what would be an indication if you're managing a team for you to say this person is ready to become an account executive?
So I feel really passionate about this, and I've written these blogs before too, and I think there's not enough people out there in the world that are helping people understand there's patience is going to help you. And in the grand scheme of things, like you have a long career in front of you, like you're probably going to work for 40 plus odd years. You just graduated, or you're just entering this SDR role. You've never been in sales before. Doing it for 18 months is usually the rough estimate. I actually see there's a level of mastery that has to happen. That happens usually between 6 to 9 months. In most cases, it's 3,000 dials of the phone that give you about 300 conversations, because you get told no probably 250 times. And some of it's that pattern recognition. I heard it, I know how to respond. I heard it, I know how to respond. So there's something about those 3,000 dials that usually takes companies between like 3 to 6 months to do that. So now I know the role and I can produce in the role. Then there's some mastery that has to happen where it's understanding, okay, the next thing that happens there. And then from that 9-month mark into like the 12 to 18-month mark, potentially even 24, potentially even 36, depending on the organization, is really are you producing at a level that's consistent? And are you hitting your number consistently on a personal level? And I've always seen that there's always somewhere around that 11 to 15-month mark with really high performers that they hit a valley. And why I like that happening as the SDR role, it's really easy to recover. It's easier to recover than the account executive role. Because when you miss an account executive, it can be a downward spiral. Because as soon as you start missing, if you've never experienced it, now you have to catch up. You got to figure out how to catch up. There's a lot of other things. With the SDR role, you can do it at 11 to 15 months in the SDR role, and you should be able to recover the next month as long as you just come back and do the behaviors properly. So it's how do I work through the mental state of failure in a role and take the next step after that. So that's usually what I look at, is have you had that rough patch and have you got through it? And there's a lot of people that once they hit that rough patch, they just think sales isn't for them. So that's a lot of what I look for. Have you hit that valley? If you have, like, how'd you work through it? What'd that look like? Have you start to demonstrate some of the behaviors for, can I set a firm agenda? Can I come with preparation to the next meeting, the next call? Can I show product knowledge? Have I started to mentor other people and teach other people? So there's things I'm starting to look for. You kind of naturally take those things on anyways.
It's interesting. So so for example, in external sales, you always have visit reports, right?
Yeah.
What are the equivalent of that in internal sales?
So for intern sales, like for me, it's more of how often are you setting a demo? How often are you having a conversation? What's your conversion rate? So when I started talking about know your numbers earlier, are your conversion rates going up? Do I know if you make 50 phone calls instead of 100 phone calls, you get roughly the same result? So it shows you're starting to become more efficient. At that point, you should know how to have some of those dialogues and conversations you need. There's a lot of other indicators you can start to see and adjust to.
So that's essentially that's what you need to make sure that you tell the people about how to deal with this as well. So once they do this, so the visit reports, you don't necessarily have visit reports, but you actually have the people doing it. But from a sales manager perspective, is there something that is documented so that you know that they could always say, I'm doing this, right? You can say, I'm picking up, I'm learning through this process, but if the proof is not there, so what kind of things do you use to try and gauge the behaviors of the people? So the dials I can understand, but other things to say, wait, this person is maybe locking more demos or is progressing further in the sales process, even when they hand it over. So are those things that you can actually capture?
Yeah, so you could look at how many people close deals, or how many deals that you passed off have closed. Are usually indicators. So if you can't source deals that we can close, you're probably not good at qualifying them well enough yet, which is a problem. Because if you get into the account executive role, can you identify if they're a qualified prospect or not? If you can't today as an SDR, what's telling me you can do it in the other role?
Indeed. Yeah.
So I think those are indicators you can look at. In a really, really strong organization, there should be a really well-lit path for an SDR into the next role. Here's the action I need you to take. Here's the things I need you to do. Here's the things and actions once you get to a certain level we'll start to train you on. And I think all of it still goes back to foundational execution.
Absolutely.
So can you do the sales techniques that you need today? You'll just do them slightly different or maybe even more in depth with an account executive. So it's just, can you show me some of the behaviors? Can you show me you're able to do these things?
Indeed. And for me, it's very, very interesting because it's that part. Because I'm always skeptical because a lot of times, I'm always wary because of the fact that your SDRs might be doing the job right, but it could be messed up by the AEs. So the more we rely on those kind of things, and if the AEs are not doing it, but they can always go back, if there's nothing to measure concretely what the SDRs have done, the AEs could always hide behind the fact that we got lousy leads coming in, or we had demos that they should have acted as bouncers. I like the word bouncers. And they should not have been ushers and sent everything our way, which is very, very interesting because the whole aspect of marketing and sales in the external sales domain has always been about the fact that marketing giving leads that salespeople have always pushed back, except now what we're looking at is one more level of nuance, which is SDRs passing on leads that AE might mess up. Not all the time. It could be that SDR is also messing up. So for me, that's what I'm always curious to see. If that is the case, how do you protect the SDR saying, okay, what I have is, this is your dashboard. These are the activities that you've done. So I like the fact that you mentioned activities. I'm not a big fan of just outcomes. It's just not dials. It's about what did you do during the dials. If they say no, did you record something? What did you take away from it? So that's why in the external sales world, visit reports help. You can take a look. So did they do these things? They can exaggerate. You see what I mean?
Yeah, and I want to make sure that's clear too on the activity level things. Activities and outcomes are only indicators. They're not actually the behaviors that actually translate into helping the person. So for me, I usually look at activity level, I look at outcomes, and then I usually make a judgment based off of what that could be, and then I'll actually verify. Another benefit of inside sales is I can actually ride shotgun, or I can do a ride along, depending on that scenario. I can do a ride along with that person and sit there and verify. I can listen to call recordings and verify. I can do all these things to verify the behaviors actually match what I feel. And I can do it faster because it's inside sales. So there's a lot of it. And then I can also coach them quicker because they're right next to me. I can pull a bunch of them into a room and have a dialogue on certain techniques. So I think there's other things that you can go verify. So for me, if I always lean on, I think the account executive's not closing them, I'll verify the SDRs doing their job. And then what a lot of organizations end up happening is the more senior you get, the less training you get. What you'll find out is account executives want it just as much as the SDR. So we're going to try to help the account executive get better. We're going to help them hit those foundational things, the basics of, do you set a firm agenda? Do you ask the right questions? Do you set a next step? Like, do you do those things? And we're going to coach you that until the end of the time, like until I'm blue in the face. And I think oftentimes a lot of organizations, as soon as you start to graduate out of the SDR role, you're not going to get training. You're not going to get the sales enablement you need it.
And what you're saying is, the higher up you go, the less training you get in sales. I'm not saying that it's not about the things. You get leadership training, but it's different. Sales leadership for me is quite different. So you talk of SDR to AE, the jump from AE to if you become an inside sales manager, that also is something you said you trained yourself. That should not have been the case, because if that's the case, actually, let's actually take a huge step backward. Let's say, for example, if I'm a firm and I've had a history of going with an external sales force, what could be indicators for me to start thinking, saying, hey, my external salespeople are very, very expensive, and what indicators should a company be looking for? So now I'm asking, of course, you're a big fan of inside sales, so I'm hoping to hear answers from you that will trigger saying, okay, certain kind of customers, certain things should give you very clear saying that external salespeople are wasted on those roles. They could be doing something else.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. So look at your customer and map out their journey, right? Map out what it takes to become a customer with them. And what you'll find is a lot of those actions, they're just not necessary. You don't have to physically be there to get them to commit to you. You don't have to be present at an event to build the relationship with them. And some of them don't even want it. Like, I've even had the ability in my career to sell a Fortune 50 deal and never leave the office. It's so in that sense is not everybody wants it. Even if you offer it, don't come here because all it does is disrupt my day. Like I'll take the hour meeting. I don't have to worry about walking you out, taking you to lunch, going to dinner at the end of the night. Like some people just don't want that. So I think it's some of it. Seek to understand with your customer and start to ask them those types of questions. Hey, you became a customer. What can make it easier for you? Hey, did this process work for you when we went through it? What were the things that we could have done better? Like seek to understand from your customer. I think those are really good indicators. I think on top of it is go look at the use of time by your reps. So if they're spending most of their time on the road and they're not actually doing proactive activities to build pipeline, how could we adjust? Maybe we create an SDR role that's prospecting to make them more effective when they're on the road. So that way when they go to Austin, Texas, I have an SDR that's building pipeline in Austin, Texas, so it's not 1 meeting, it's 4. So you're starting to look at what are the things we can do. So you don't need to go, maybe you don't even lean all into sales, inside sales. Maybe you lean into part of it. Maybe you have the SDR role get created and they are just supporting the external team. Or maybe you have like this junior account executive team that's created that's selling small deals, that's not wasting the time of your external team that's very expensive and working larger, more complex deals where those are two very different things. Those are very different sales cycles. And it's hard to make the mental switch between the two. So there's a lot of different indicators you start to look at of when you should make the switch, why you should make the switch. I could sell you all day long and why it's cost effective and all the other things, but I think some of it's what's right for your customer first, and then what's right for your organization to make them most effective and help them make the most money possible.
Indeed. Phil, what is your opinion on the fact that should inside sales be a shared function? Because I can easily imagine a company that has multiple business units and with different sales cycles. But should inside sales be division specific? You know what I mean? Business unit specific? Or because the role is about lead generation, okay, let me take it back. Lead generation, making sure you do initial prospecting. Let's say that's the role, right? Should the role, because that raises a different set of issues, right? So for example, you said something about, okay, I'm going to go to Austin. The example you gave is I want to go to Austin and then I'm going to call ahead and I'm going to try and get 4 or 5 appointments for you to get there. But I could also be using the time to take a look at my existing customer base and see whether there are opportunities with that existing customer base. So essentially my question to you is that, but that makes sense, but it makes sense if I have a customer who's buying from multiple business units. So my long-winded question to you is that, ending up finally is, should we have internal sales and the roles of SDRs or ISRs, should it be a shared function? Or should it be very specific to every specific business unit?
So I think again it goes back to your customer. So if you need a huge amount of institutional knowledge to talk to that person and make them transfer trust from your company to them, maybe you have a very specialized role. If it's not necessary, where it's more of we understand our customer enough, we have a product fit enough that we can just generally have that conversation. So I think it just depends on the organization. I've seen it done multiple different ways. I've been fortunate in my career to work with inside of some fairly large organizations that are enterprise level, inside of a shared services type of environment. And I've seen them be very successful. I've also seen it fall down because there is a vast amount of knowledge. If I'm selling rocket ships and I'm having conversations with rocket scientists, how do you level up? How do you put yourself in that conversation and have a good dialogue? So you need to know enough to be dangerous in the SDR role, where it's I know enough. I know some indicators that are pain and problems, and then I can hand it off to someone more seasoned that has that. If you're closing the deal and you're an account executive, I don't know if you can do the shared service side of things. I think there's still some knowledge base you have to have. But what I've also seen our organizations do is pull in somebody that's like a sales engineer or sales consultant, where you're there really just to manage the relationship, be a quarterback of the deal. The sales engineer is there to kind of put the pieces together for you and ensure that what we're doing we can do. We say we're doing, we can actually do.
Indeed. And all that you say for me is what is very important, because inside sales goes beyond just purely for SaaS or software and service companies. It can actually even be used in companies that have traditionally worked with external sales forces and selling complex piece of equipment as well. And I think that's one of the things that I hear a lot these days is building on that. So you talked about the fact that, okay, you have an existing customer and inside sales can also be used to help them out. I hear the term customer success
Yeah.
being thrown out a lot these days. And my question to you is, if the job of a customer success is to help the customer use your products and services and solutions to the best extent possible so that they're successful, is it a different kind of internal sales role, the equivalent of internal sales but taking care of key accounts? What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, I think the person that's successful in that is a different profile.
Yeah.
And the client success or the account management type of role is a sales function for the most part.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, hey, are you okay? Are you happy? How do I help you? How do I get you to where you need to be? But when you're growing your base and trying to, one, retain the customers, retention's a big thing. So are you happy and are you going to keep on as a customer, especially in the SaaS world? So if anybody wants to go deeper on the SaaS world, if you have too many people falling out of the back end of your sales process and you got to replace that, so make it easy. If you had $10 million of recurring revenue and $2.5 million falls out at the end of the year, you got to replace the $2.5 million on top of growing. Makes it hard. Multiply that if you're a $100 million business. So it's how much do we have to replace and how do we minimize that risk? Because then the new business side of things, the account executive side of things, is you're just adding on to where you're at rather than having to replace. So that's the reason why that specialization makes sense there. So some of it's, can I just grow the accounts that exist inside of that role and make them more successful inside of organizations so that way we're even maybe replacing revenue by ourselves without having an account executive.
Exactly, yeah.
So maybe we lost 15% of our customers, but we replaced it with 20% revenue increase because we grew the customers that were there with more users or with a bigger product purchase or whatever the widget is that you're selling. So I think some of it's the function of it. And it is a very unique skill set where it's long-term relationship you're thinking versus the account executives. Oftentimes it's a short-term relationship.
But even it could lead to long-term, but it's the job of the other person. Because that for me is one of those things that we constantly encounter today. You talk about SaaS, but we've worked with companies where they're moving towards PaaS, which is product as a service.
Yeah.
Or this company that talked about training as a service, so essentially TaaS. So we see that happening a lot more, and that's for me got me thinking along the lines of the mantra that they use there is called land and expand.
Yeah.
Right, but of course you need to land there first. So essentially you need to get your SDRs to actually do that out there. And my question to you is that if SDRs, let's say for example, they talk to a customer and they get the next step forward, and then later on the customer becomes a customer, and to what extent is the SDR eventually going back and now you have a different product? Can the SDR go back and again pick up the call and call the same customer again, or after that it's hands off? Once your foot is in the door, SDRs are hands off.
Depends on the organization. In most organizations, when that's set up, the SDR only solves for their step.
Okay.
And really it's any sales. Just solve for the next step. Just solve for the next step. Just solve for the next thing. And for the SDR, it's solve for getting somebody interested, having a conversation, disqualify if they need to be, hand it off to an account executive, let them run the deal. So you're just solving for that. I have seen organizations, especially really large, complex, large deals, where the SDR might get involved again and kind of own an account and support more of like a key account executive or key account manager that is kind of a full end-to-end salesperson. And really all they're there is just to open up different lines of business. So it just depends on the organization and how it's set up. But for the most part, I would say 75 to 80% of organizations don't have it set up where the SDR is going back and working with accounts. It's more of that account manager, client success role to do that and do that functionality.
Now, so we are almost coming to the end of a couple of questions that I have. So one of the things we talked about was the SDR and the AE. For me, it sounds like a very interesting, because I'm an SDR and I have a manager, that's great. But an AE has a big impact on how the manager eventually rates them. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And to what extent, what are the things that you can try and do to get the AEs and the SDRs to actually work together well beyond the nature of the job itself? So what are some of the things that you would recommend?
So the first thing I would say, and this goes across anytime you hand off any relationship or anything at all that you're handing off from one person to the other, is have a clear set of ground rules. So I start with the service level agreement. So let's start with, I promise before I hand this off to you, lead, this lead is going to be qualified. I'm going to know that these things about them, and I'm going to know XYZ is at least present before I hand it off to you. I'll at least give you that. And the other person on the other end has to say, I trust that that's probably going to be the case. And once I have it, I promise I'll do these 3 or 4 actions for you to ensure that I at least take it to that next step. So there's got to be some kind of service level agreement, and it's got to be clear in black and white where there's no gray area between the two relationships. Because then it allows us then to lean back on, well, you didn't do it the way you're supposed to do it. Here's what you should do. Did you do it? No, great. Let's have the conversation. Let's adjust. Let's get back to where you should be. So I think first, let's start with the rules and make sure everybody has the same ground rules before they start playing the game. Outside of that, I think it's making sure that they're listening to each other. They're having these conversations. I see a lot of organizations that will have an SDR listen to an AE because they're the more senior person, but how often does the AE go back and listen to the SDR and hear what they're saying? So there's some correction that has to happen on both ends. Most times, hey, get the SDR to go listen to a qualification call. Make sure they know what that actually looks like. And it's a good way to heat check this in an organization is go ask a SDR, when you hand this off and the account executive starts to have this conversation, what happens in that call? And you'll be interested. Do they fumble around and not really have an answer? Is it really not clear that these are the things I'm looking for? If they can't answer that question, they're not qualifying it properly. So I think that's a good way to heat check. Like, just make sure they know what happens next. That's what, have them go sit with the account executive that does it perfectly, right? The vision of good for you. Don't send them, maybe if it's a person they even work with closely, like don't send them to the person that they just work with closely because they might not do it properly. So I think it's go give them vision of good and then maybe give them the other account executive. So help them understand what the next step actually is and make it clear for them. Those are the first two things I would say. Get a service level agreement and help them understand what the next step is and start solving for it. And then a lot of account executives, they get into the next role and they forget that they used to be an SDR and how hard it actually is. And the empathy just disappears. So some of it's like you got to get the team to check their ego a little bit and humble themselves a little bit of we're here together. There's no us versus them. It's a we. We are working on this together. We have a common goal. So as long as you align their goals as well, it helps.
Absolutely. Now, actually, you talk of aligning goals, right? So now, sorry about that. Is there any way by which you try and, is there some kind of a rule where you say, for every AE, we need to have 3 or 4 SDRs?
Yeah.
Right? Do you have some sort of a rule there? Because I can easily imagine other kind of situations where the thing that you're selling is so specific, the AEs could be very verticals focused.
Right.
And then you will have multiple SDRs going to one AE. What is a typical way that would work?
Yeah, so a lot of organizations that are high growth organizations will have a higher ratio of SDRs to account executives. So when you're growing, you have to grow triple digits, quadruple your business, whatever, every year. You're going to have SDRs that are usually a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio. 2-to-1 is kind of minimum in a high growth company. So I think that's one piece of it. But even a lot of organizations, it's having multiple SDRs that can support an AE. The rule of thumb a lot of times is, do I have to add an AE or do I have to add SDRs? Is 80% of their calendar full? So if most of their calendar is full to where they don't have enough time in their day to do some of the prospecting things they need to support themselves, do you pull an SDR into it? So, or do you support them with an additional SDR? So there's different ways to kind of do the math. It just kind of depends on the organization.
So it's not, but of course, like, you can also imagine that in some cases that if the AE is specialized in one industry, then you could have multiple SDRs feeding into it.
Correct.
As against if it's one-on-one, where in a small geography, you can just say, okay, we have 1 or 2 SDRs, AE, and that's going to be constant all the time.
Yeah, 2-to-1 is pretty standard. 1-to-1 is pretty likely as well. It just depends on the organization, where you're at in your life cycle, what your growth goals are, and working from there. How much can the SDR produce? If they can produce 60 to 70 opportunities a month, maybe you just need 1-to-1. If they can produce 15, maybe you need 2-to-1.
So the last question to wrap it up, of course, I'm sure we can talk about this forever, but where do you see the internal sales function going? It's already taken a large chunk of how to do business in sales and the external sales as well. Going forward, where do you see internal sales progressing?
Yes, we mentioned a little bit. I think we have to let AI play out a little bit. AI is going to be an interesting element of efficiency gains. I don't know if it removes the role completely. I think you'll get better SDRs where they're able to focus their time and do some of the tasks they need to do quicker. So you'll hear the term personalization if you ever do research, which is how well do I know the person I'm speaking to and having a conversation, and what personalization is. I'll leave it up to interpretation for the audience, because that's a whole other debate to get into. You'll see things like competitive knowledge, product knowledge, supplying me the right answer at the right time. All that stuff will start to happen. So you'll see ramp time happen to shrink back down. The fear of a lot of managers is, great, I do that. Do they actually have the skills they need to take that next step whenever they need it? So there's a lot of things that we have to adjust to in the world when technology starts to adjust it. So 5 years from now, I don't see a massive change. I see it becoming a heck of a lot more efficient. 10 years from now, it maybe isn't a role, or it's a completely different type of role, or it's something completely new. And I think it just depends on the organization, how big the organization is, how complex, how much knowledge you need to know, what the buyer on the other end of the phone or the internet wants to how they want to buy, how they want to purchase.
And I think thank you so much for your time, Phil. And I'm sure that for the audience who are interested, that we'll provide you some more information about some of the thoughts that Phil has shared on his blog post as well. And in my personal opinion, I think going forward, the internal sales profession is progressing so fast that business schools have to catch up to it and start training the next generation of young people going into the sales profession. And I think we have a job as faculty members to try and make sure that we prepare the students for the future. And everything that I've heard today makes sense, is that if you want people to be successful in external sales, a great training ground is internal sales. Yeah. And with customers increasingly saying that they don't have the time, you have to learn to juggle with whatever you get, and having the skill set that you do with internal sales, but you apply to an external sales situation, it's not necessarily going to hurt you. On the contrary, it's going to help you manage your time better and do better territory management. So with that, we would like to again thank Phil for his time, and we would like to sign off and stay tuned. We will have another speaker next month, and looking forward to any questions that you might have. Thank you again.
Thanks.